It's 105.5 WDHA here on All Mixed Up. I need to warn my next guest. Paul, there are two rabbit holes that I can go down in a heartbeat. My listeners are well aware of this. One is the Motown rabbit hole, and the other is the power pop rabbit hole. And whenever I go down that second one, invariably, your global album comes out. Paul Cowsill's my guest here on DHA and All Mixed Up. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Jim. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. The new record has just been out for a couple of days now, and it's really, really good, called Rhythm of the World. What took so long between that one and global?
Just everything, Susan back in the 80s and in the 90s, she kept talking to me and Bob and Bill and Barry and John about, hey, come on, guys, we need to get together. Let's everybody write a song. Let's take that into the studio, and whoever song it is, they can produce it, and everybody else will have to do what they say. And it was like, oh, okay. Never got to it. And then poor Bill and Barry passed away, and it still was coming out of Susan, and we knew that it had to be done. And so when we were on the Happy Together tour, we're just out there every day and hearing Howard Kalin go, you got to get up, at the end of the show when they're doing Happy Together, he's insisting that our audience stand up. And, in our demographic, if you're in that chair for 20 minutes, it's going to be hard to get up. But we'd hear him every single night. And so one day we looked at each other and we go, man, we got to write a song called You Gotta Get Up. We'll have Howard screaming at the end of it or something. We didn't really know. But boy, we were on this bus and everybody would go to sleep, and me, Bob, and Susan would stay up, and we did You Gotta Get Up. I was sitting there and we kept going, hey, we better start writing if we're going to do this. And man, I just sat there and I just started writing down lyrics and stuff. I gave them to Susan. I go, hey, Susan, check this out. And she goes, oh, wow. And she goes, hey, Bob, check this out. And Bob looks at that and he goes, oh, wow. And so he immediately had a melody for it. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we had just written the first song of the new album. None of the other songs had been written yet. And so all of a sudden, we realized, okay, this can work, because we're hours and hours and miles on that bus up at night all alone. And we started churning these things out, whether it was in a hotel room, on the bus, you name it, we were writing.
Given your musical history, I think it's safe to say that on a certain Sunday night in 1964, in February, you and I were both in front of the television watching the Beatles.
Correct.
And Paul, I remember looking at that going, I'm a little kid. I'm going,
okay.
Wow, this is kind of cool. I didn't play an instrument. I just knew that there was something going on there, and I wanted to figure out what it was.
Right.
Flash forward a little bit more than 4 years later. I'm in Asbury Park, New Jersey, in Convention Hall. So it's August of 1968. There's a young kid on the drums. He's roughly my age. And I'm looking at him going, I've been taking drum lessons. That looks really cool. I might be able to do that. Well, that kid was your brother, John.
Right,
you guys were the very first concert that I saw.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Your whole life?
Yeah, that was the very first concert that I went to. And that was really, in all seriousness, Paul, that was the moment when I'm thinking, wow, like if he can do it, because it was one thing to see the Beatles.
Yes.
They're older, they're from England, but I'm looking like he's my age. Wow. And it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, Bill and Bob, we all sat there that night. We all have a different story about that night. Now, Bill and Bob, boy, they saw something that really was important to them. In fact, that night, I've talked to Bob about it and Bill. That night, they realized like there was a bass guitar in the world, because what Bill and Bob had going was they had two guitars and Barry on drums. This was a very early trio by these guys. And then they saw the Beatles, and they were looking at Paul going, what is he playing? It's only got 4 strings. What is this? That they didn't even know about a bass guitar. Well, then they got that bass guitar going and pulled Johnny and then made Barry go to bass. and had John go to drums. John, he just picked it up. He was, and you could see him on our Ed Sullivan show, man. He was rocking out, that little guy. I mean, he could beat those drums, and he's still beating them today. And he was incredible. Now, for me, that was Sunday night. Monday, I went up to the bus stop where all the girls and all the guys, we've always been there, and all the girls liked all the guys, and this whole thing going on of junior high and high school stuff. And all of a sudden I realized these girls weren't talking to us. And these girls were all in a huddle over there talking to, they had the pictures and they're going, oh, the Beatles, the Beatles. And I'm going, ay. The Beatles are cramping our style here. But boy, it sure did send a lot of people into music. We have a podcast and we'll have guests on, and every single one of our guests goes, yeah, I was watching the Beatles that night on Ed Sullivan, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I hope the Beatles know, Paul and Ringo anyway, that how many people they got going in music. I've never heard them ask that question, or if they could even answer that, like, hey, Paul, did you realize that you were going to have this crazy thing happen, and everybody decided to make a band because of you guys? And it really, I mean, I don't find anybody in our genre of old guys that didn't have that as their motivation. Some guys will tell you, wow, I just heard all the girls screaming and I wanted that, and then the other ones were going, wow, they were just so cool and writing and melodies and stuff like that. So yeah, it was crazy.
I had Lenny Kaye on some months ago, Paul, and he referred to it as, I wanted to see what was going on under the hood, because he, like you and me, was watching the Ed Sullivan show that night. And, the Beatles, not to spend a whole lot of time on them, but the Beatles changed things twice. That moment in February of '64 when literally everything changed. And you think about where the country had been. We'd lost a president in tragic circumstances.
Yep.
And it was almost as if we were told it's okay to feel good again. Our attitudes on music, hair, how we dressed, everything changed. 3 years later, they did it again with Sgt. Pepper, which, for a band to do that not once but twice is just remarkable.
Yes, yeah. They were the forefront guys. They had all the chord progressions still available. There was still you can put a song together that nobody had heard yet. Now you come to this time of life and everybody has that in them. Everybody who's playing pop music has that Beatle thing rolling right through them, and none of us really understand it. It's almost like by osmosis, but they really caused quite a revolution in music, and it spurred on a lot of us.
I don't know if I can pull this riff off or not. I have a Rickenbacker 12 string with me.
I'm cool.
A big sucker for Rickenbacker sounds.
Oh.
But you mentioned, chord progressions, and I think this is the title track.
That's dun, dun, dun,
right?
Yeah.
Which sounds like, right? I mean, you take one thing, and even on the liner notes, you talk about sitting around and, well, hey, that song reminds me of, and I think with Rhythm of the World and Your Bird Can Sing was one of the songs that you came up with.
Well, we were recording, and we'd make up a little part in the booth, and then we'd run out and put it on, and we'd come back in and we'd listen it on the big speakers, and we'd go, God, that sounds like Fleetwood Mac, or that sounds like Dave Mason. So what we said to each other was, hey, let's just start writing down all the names of these bands that we're saying, and then we'll put them in the album. So, when people go, well, what was your influence? This whole paragraph of all these people are our influence. And nobody's stealing anything nowadays. It's just that every chord progression and everything had already been used, and we're bound to go back into some of those other things, but it was incredible the way Rhythm of the World, the whole album came out just like that.
Tell me about the title track, because that's probably my favorite song on the record.
Yeah, it is so good. And, Susan has this, she always hits me when I say it, but she's not here to hit me, like a Pollyanna kind of vibe about the world, and look at the world is so beautiful. But in Rhythm of the World, we have to say, but we need to be careful here, because the world is this. But if we don't take care, if we're not good stewards then something bad is going to happen, and she felt it coming and coming. And so that's what that was. And that's an absolute juxtaposition to Nuclear Winter, which, we can either have Rhythm of the World. And if we don't accept that, then we might have to accept this other situation.
Now, Nuclear Winter's not a new song, correct?
No, Bob wrote it back in the 80s.
Yeah, so that's kind of a scary thing when the lyrics, like we're 40 years coming up on 40 years from that song, and it's still really valid.
Well, it wasn't so valid in the 80s. Everything seemed kind of groovy, but as kids, we were jumping under desks thinking that we weren't going to get burnt by the nuclear blast, So when we were kids and the Cowsills were famous back then, we had civil rights issue. We had a military issue. We had all these issues that now are relative today. Nuclear Winter makes more sense today than it did when Bob wrote it. And it's a warning. It's, we're not preaching anything here, but we're old enough now to where we can put some messages in there because of our just of life and experience in life. And we need to, we're just like calling out, not a warning, just, hey, this is a little message you might want to listen to. And, we're not afraid to say that now. When we were kids, it was like, oh, we can't say that. They'll think we're this. That's out the window now. We can say anything because we're 70.
The nuns didn't have us under desks, Paul. They had us in the hallway, covering our heads, saying Hail Marys repeatedly while we were going through air raid drills.
Yeah, we all went to Catholic school too. We were in St. Joe's in Ohio. We were in St. Joe's in Rhode Island. We were St. Joe's kids all the time. Yeah.
Paul Cowsill is my guest this morning here at 105.5 WDHA on All Mixed Up. One of the things that has always stood out in the Cowsills music is the harmonies. And there are a lot of great harmony groups, but the thing that I think makes you guys so special is the blend that can only come from family members. There's something about it when it's a family group singing that you don't get elsewhere. The Beach Boys are a great example of that.
Yep. It's the tonations, it's like me and Susan can sing together and we sound like our mother. I know that sounds weird, but we do this song, You Were on My Mind, in our regular show. And man, when me and her are singing that, I am hearing my mother in my head. And it's like, because she sang it when we were kids, right? And it's like, holy cow, this is crazy. But we hear it, we'll hear our harmonies. And, if there's three of us doing three harmonies, those other two harmonies are popping from the vibrations between these two. And I really believe only siblings can do that, because otherwise it's two separate voices and that's never going to happen. But when you're siblings, there's going to be that overlay of, oh, wow, we sound like Bill, or, oh, wow, you guys sound like me, or it's so crazy, and Bob made a point of it the other night. We were playing a show in Naperville last Saturday, and we were talking to the audience and we were telling them how it freaks us out even when we hear our harmonies back. It's, and we hear them, we go, oh, I see what they're saying. I see. And this album is covered with harmonies.
One of the other songs that really stands out, and especially in the wake of what has happened recently in Southwest Florida, is Katrina. You lost your brother, Barry, in that as well. How difficult a song was that to write?
Well, it took from the time Katrina took Barry to a few months ago. Bob penned that. We were all wondering who was going to write the Katrina song, right, about Barry. And Bob told me and Susan, man, I was sitting there and Barry came through his brain. One night he was sitting there working on this, and all of a sudden Barry came through. And so all of a sudden Bob says this song is what Barry was saying. And this is from his point of view, his POV. I was born in 54. Well, Bob certainly wasn't born in 54. And so that's Barry, stomach on the floor. My mother was pregnant with John, and we had the hurricane in 54 was Carol, which, was pretty good. But we were in Rhode Island and our mom let us run out in it and stuff like that. But, but that was Barry's initial hurricane experience. And we'd had a few more in Rhode Island for sure. But boy, this one got him. And, we had sent him a plane ticket and he was supposed to leave the day Katrina hit. and we never heard from him, except a few days later we heard a message from Barry saying, "Hey, I'm ready to go, come on, somebody come down here and get me." And right there it was chilling, because we knew that he had no idea what he was surrounded by this hurricane, and he was held up in a building, and a wave took him out. And that's what you hear at the end of Katrina, is that wave, and over and over and over, and then you hear Barry goes, "And it's over." But it was
Wow.
Bob's, but it was all Barry saying all of this. It was very weird.
When you're on the road these days, who's in the touring band?
In the touring band is me, Bob, and Susan, the originals. Then my son Brendan is our guitar player. He also sings with us. Bob's son's Ryan. I was done with doing keyboards. I just wanted to sing, and so he took over keyboards for me. And then so there's two more Cowsills there, taking Billy and Barry's place. And then Russ Broussard is our drummer, who's Susan's husband, and Mary Lasang. And Jim, it was so funny because the rhythm section is totally a New Orleans rhythm section. So us Cowsills, we'd be over here working on our stuff while Russ and Mary were working on their track. And Mary would be writing all these bass lines for all this music. All she would have to hear is a guitar and a voice. And I think that's what makes the music unique, is that you hear their drumming and their bass playing, and the rhythm of this it's got a different feel than if John had been playing drums and Barry had been playing bass. There's no 2/4 rock beat here. Russ is just everywhere, as a Cajun guy would be. So they really made this album, in my opinion.
It's a terrific record. It's called Rhythm of the World. You can find all things about the Cowsills online at cowsill.com. Paul, thank you so much for your time this morning. I've really enjoyed talking with you and sharing some memories.
Thanks for having me, Jim. And you can see I'm in the world. We're in the universe. And I appreciate you.